Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Chapter 26, The Middle Class, from 1945 to 63. This is our last lecture before spring break, yay, and we are hitting the end of the book pretty soon, so even more yay. Alright, let's get started. So here we have our middle class family ideal. You've got your traditional family of four. The mother, the father, the daughter, and the son, spending time together, of course. Camping in the great outdoors. Usually the mom's the one serving the food, including, she's even serving her father. Let's see, they're on vacation. This is going to be probably funded by paid vacation time from the father's job, because the mother likely is a stay-at-home mother. This picture is taken outdoors at Zion National Park in Utah. Again, a very domestic scene. This is the ideal during the 50s and 60s. All right. So the Bretton Woods systems. This is an international conference in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in July of 1944. Created the World Bank to provide loans for the reconstruction of war-torn Europe and former colonies. The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, was set up to stabilize currencies and provide a predictable monetary environment for trade, with the U.S. dollar serving as the benchmark. 1947, the first General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, established practices for nations participating in overseas trade. Bretton Woods systems rested on ideas of an open market economy and the ability to make the U.S. capital available to other nations who shared political goals. So just opportunity to borrow money and trade and whatnot. So, all right. Military-industrial complex, which is what we see in the picture there. By 1961, the defense industry employed 3.5 million Americans. Eisenhower warned against this complex gaining too much political influence. After 1945, the U.S. government operated in a state of perpetual readiness for war. So remember, we go into World War I not prepared at all. World War II, we're better prepared, but again, we have to do most of our militarization during the war. As we leave World War II and kind of see that this has happened twice, and we've got this competition with the Soviet Union going on, we kind of stay at this readiness for war. The sprawling Pentagon becomes a massive bureaucracy. Businesses entered into contracts with the Defense Department with large shares of their profits coming from the government. For example, over 60% of Boeing, General Dynamics, and Raytheon come from military contracts. Defense spending now represents 10% of gross domestic product, or the GDP. Federal spending increased on the space race and the arms race. And government spending focused on increasing U.S. universities' research capacities, because you need to be able to have places for people to develop, and military spending limited resources for social programs. So, at this ever-readiness. All right, this is the kitchen debate. So, during the grand opening ceremony of the American National Exhibition in Moscow, Vice President Richard Nixon, who is Eisenhower's VP, and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev engaged in a heated debate about capitalism and communism in the middle of a model kitchen set up for the fair. So nothing planned, nothing organized, just something that happened. And Khrushchev is, I believe, the guy standing next to Nixon on Nixon's right. So as they're checking things out, they're having this heated debate. So, the kitchen debate. Okay. Consolidation of economic power into corporations increased after World War II. Expansion into foreign markets increased. Critics of corporate culture noted that the nation was creating organization men who were determining how the rest of the nation lived. From 1947 to 1975, worker productivity more than doubles. The annual GDP jumps from $213 billion in 1945 to more than $500 billion in 1960. By 1970, it exceeded $1 trillion. New prosperity meant a rise in personal income with low inflation. By 1960, 62% of American families owned their own homes. The percentage of wealth controlled by the wealthiest Americans declined. However, conditions at the bottom got worse as tenacious poverty accompanied the economic boom. So you can see the GDP, which is gross domestic product, meaning how much we are producing. A drop in the 30s, so you can see as the Great Depression, that's going to be 33 right there, with the bank failures and all that, and steady increase until 1970 where it gets super high. You know what, I don't know why there's not a key, I don't know. Okay, so the blue is GDP in constant, 1970, $2. Oh, accounting for inflation, all that is the red. All right. Okay, the GI Bill. More than 50% of college students post-war were veterans. Universities expanded to meet the demand. Increased earning power meant more consumer spending and increased home ownership. So you can see right there, that is a college on the GI Bill. So you can see a majority of those students are young men. You have plenty of women in there, but definitely a lot of young men. Class meeting in a large course in the lecture hall. Students are mostly white, men and women, some older and some younger. The photo illustrates the growth of higher education in the post-war years due to both the GI Bill and rising middle-class aspirations and incomes. Growth of higher education created the skilled workforce that would both build and benefit from post-war prosperity. So when people come back from the war, many of them go to college because they either missed out or they had never gone, various reasons, but the government allowed them to go on the GI Bill. So, let's see. As far as trade unions go, collective bargaining was embraced by workers through World War II and after. Unions demanded increased wages but wanted to be able to afford the products that they were producing. For example, the United Auto Workers at General Motors. So they want to make the car, but they want to be able to afford the car as well. Treaty of Detroit, workers accepted the use of collective bargaining as the primary method of setting employment terms. Labor Management Accord. Unions worked to provide members with pension plans and company-paid health insurance. For workers who were not organized, you of course still have challenges. All right. Consumption for the home drove the post-war American economy, including home appliances and automobiles, both of which consumers were encouraged to replace every few years. Children also encouraged consumption, of course, with baby products, toys, children's products, and then, of course, teen products. Many teenagers had small incomes, which made them the new consumer to target. So babysitting, part-time jobs, that kind of stuff. If you were a boy, maybe you were out doing lawns for people. Okay, if you look at the picture on the right, this is going to be an advertisement for Motorola televisions. It features a television in a wooden case. It also includes a turntable and a stereo, multifunction. It is a well-appointed suburban living room, featured a well-dressed family, parents, 2 children, and then grandparents, who were probably just over visiting for the day. The ad is pitched first to women who wield a great deal of power as consumers in this era. Mom is the only person standing in the ad, and the ad explains to her first what Motorola TV means to your family, suggesting that it will bring beauty as well as entertainment to your home. Second, the ad is pitched to men as the family breadwinners. For him, television means relaxation after work and low-cost fun at home. It's pitched as a family activity, hours of happiness without leaving home. So you have all kinds of ways that they are trying to get everybody. 1947, there were 7,000 TV sets in American homes. By 1950, there were 7.3 million, so just in 3 short years. And by 1960, 80% of American homes had at least one television set. How many do you have? I have 6, and it's just me and my husband. I think that's overkill. Especially we also have computers with Netflix and whatnot. Oh, and you'd think all we do is sit and watch TV. Nope, not sure. I wish. Anyway. By 1960s, companies are creating advertising campaigns with visual narratives. Sales of advertised products rose dramatically, and TV shows narrowly portrayed the middle-class life. So, the TV show Bewitched, which portrays him as an ad executive, it really has become a very popular job in the 60s because you've got television and all that as a different medium. All right, rock and roll. So the youth culture was defined by its music. The teenager emerged as a cultural phenomenon in the 1950s, and it is identified as a market by advertisers. Teens rejected the ballads of the 1940s and celebrated music inspired by African American rhythm and blues, such as Elvis Presley there on the right. Many adults viewed it as an invitation to rebel against social norms. Elvis was super controversial. Super controversial. He was that, he wagged his hips and whatnot. So, all right, bebop or improvisational jazz, formed by black musicians, enjoyed by black youth, and white beats. Beats is a group of writers and poets centered in New York and San Francisco who disdained middle-class materialism and glorified spontaneity, sexual adventure, drug use, and spirituality. For example, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg. It's so weird, I hear voices. I don't know where they're coming from. Okay. All right, Billy Graham, that's him over there on the right. Americans yearned for a reaffirmation of faith in an age of anxiety about nuclear annihilation and the spread of annihilation, and the spread of godless communism. Church membership increases from 49% of the population in 1940 to 70% in 1960. That's a big jump. Graham uses TV, radio, and advertising to spread his evangelical Protestant message. The California-based Robert Schuller told Americans that so long as they lived moral lives, they deserved the material blessings of modern life. So we have always known, about the pledge and the money. It all says, "In God we trust," or "Under God." This comes into play in 1945. So the phrase "Under God" is put into the Pledge of Allegiance in 1945. And U.S. coins carried the word "In God We Trust" after 1956. If you find coins before that, they will not say "In God We Trust." The religious initiative struck a moderate tone, but were reflective of the concerns some Americans voiced regarding communist atheism. So again, through fear. Okay, so post-war marriages were stable and included several children. Age at marriage fell, 21 for men, 20 for women. 1950s families averaged 3.2 children. The boom peaked 1957 but remained high to early 1960s. Penicillin and other seemingly miracle drugs changed the way doctors dealt with illness and quality of life. High value on education post-war as families were headed by college education, and university systems grow to meet new demands of the baby boom generation. So remember, those are the kids born between 1945 and 1950, late 1950s. And these kids come of age in the 70s. Bottom left, that's going to be Dr. Benjamin Spock. He wrote the book Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care in 1946. It sold 1 million copies every year after publication. His expert advice on child rearing used a common sense approach, but was not reassuring for mothers who had to work outside the home. So very conservative common sense. Okay. The middle class domestic ideal. Women were expected to raise children, attend a home, and devote themselves to their husband's happiness. Psychologist's equation of motherhood with normal created tensions in the minds of the many women who had to work outside of the home. Economic needs put women outside the home as a producer, while the domestic ideal claimed her major contribution was as a consumer. You see the man in the ad, so the harder a wife works, the cuter she looks. And then down at the bottom, "Gosh, honey, you seem to thrive on cooking, cleaning, and dusting, and are all tuckered out by closing time. What's the answer?" "Vitamins, darling. I always get my vitamins." It's a vitamin ad. Interesting. All right, more than 80% of women did stereotypical women's work, such as clerks, healthcare technicians, waitresses, stewardess, domestic servants, receptionists, telephone operators, and secretaries. In 1960, 97% of nurses were women, but only 6% of physicians were women. 1963, women's averaged 60% of women's work helped families to reach the middle class. All right. So morality. So there's an interesting one during the time period. So this man here on the left is Alfred Kinsey. In the ideal, American men and women were expected to channel all sexual energy towards marriage. Kinsey, a zoologist at Indiana University, wrote sexual behavior in the human male and sexual behavior in the human female. 48 for the human male, 53 for the human female. He took a scientific rather than moralistic approach to sexual practices. He broke taboos on masturbation, orgasms, homosexuality, and marital infidelity. Studies provided evidence that a sexual revolution had already begun in the United States. Hotter Than the Kinsey Report became a national figure of speech. He was, of course, criticized by statisticians and condemned by religious leaders. The homophile movement. So Kinsey's research found that 37% of men and 13% of women had engaged in homosexual activity by early adulthood. Claimed that 10% of American men were exclusively homosexual. Homophiles, gay and lesbian activist organizations in the Mattachine Society, 1951, and the Daughters of Bilitis, 1955. Homophile organizations advocated equal rights and cultivated a respectable image, encouraging members to avoid bars and clubs and to dress conservatively. Laid the foundation for the gay rights movement of the 1970s. Challenges to traditional morality received national media attention, and media themselves became a controversial source of these challenges. The United States Senate had televised hearings into violence and sex in comic books. Playboy magazine was founded in 1953, and that's Marilyn Monroe there on the cover. First time in any magazine full color, the famous Marilyn Monroe nude. It was founded, created a counter-morality to domesticity, encouraging men to spend money on themselves. All right, William J. Leavitt and the FHA, or the Federal Housing Administration. So Leavitt applied mass production techniques to home building project on Long Island in New York. $7,990 bought a basic 4-room home in 1947. Including kitchen appliances, approximately $76,000 today. I'm not really sure where you're going to buy a 4-room house for $76,000. What they're saying is that $79.90 is equivalent to $76,000, so likely you're not going to either want to live in the area of a 4-bedroom home that costs $76,000, or you're going to have to spend another $100,000 fixing it. Either way, that's not going to buy much today. Let's see, Leavitt towns were built in New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, with other builders creating similarly styled homes as well. The Federal Housing Administration and the Veterans Administration offered mortgages. Leavitt's communities were homogeneous, mostly filled with young families, enforced regulations about lawns and outdoor hanging of laundry, with restrictive covenants that kept out all who were not white. The NAACP and other groups challenged them, of course. In Shelley v. Kramer, 1948, the Supreme Court outlawed restrictive covenants, but little changed until the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Oil consumption tripled with the massive increase of cars on the road, so the National Interstate and Defense Highway Act of 1956 provides $26 billion over a 10-year period for construction of national highways. This is true during Eisenhower's time. Broad highways would ease evacuation in case of nuclear attack. It's all about the nuclear attacks. Developers of shopping malls built new structures as today's Village Green that become shopping destinations for suburban people. Brought the products to where people lived. For example, Ray Kroc, who turned McDonald's into the largest chain in the world. Eat your car. Drive-thrus and all that. Drive-ins, not drive-thrus. All right. California, the defense industry jobs brought people to California. By 1970, 10% of the nation's population lived in California. By the end of the 20th century, California's economy was among the top 10 largest in the world. Towns and cities expanded with the presence of military bases. Excuse me. All right. So you'll hear the terms Sun Belt and Rust Belt. Rust Belt is going to be your typical manufacturing areas. Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, those areas up there. That's going to be your Rust Belt. And you can see there is all those purple arrows pointing to states that are part of the Sun Belt. So Sun Belt suburbanization was best exemplified by Orange County, California. New facilities were built for the Marines, Navy, and Air Force, which brought developers to build houses and shops for the men's families. Disneyland was built as a West Coast amusement park similar to Coney Island in the early 20th century. So, but yeah, manufacturing moved. It was very heavy up in the Northeast, the middle part of the North there, Midwest, and it moves to the Sun Belt, which is going to be all those states that are kind of in the orange down there. All right. Oh, 1950, the nation's 12 largest cities lost 3.6 million whites while gaining 4.5 million non-whites. Poverty in these areas intensified. African Americans in the city had low-paying jobs and inadequate housing. Builders wanted to keep the middle class from leaving and marketed new housing to them, not the black residents. Urban renewal demolished parts of cities and relocated residents to federal housing projects. For example, the 28 buildings of 16 stories each housed 20,000 residents, nearly all black. Displaced Persons Act in 1948 let 415,000 refugees, many of them Jewish, from Europe. The Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed in 1943. McCarran-Walter Act ended exclusion of Japanese, Korean, and Southeast Asian immigrants. Mexican population in southwestern cities kept growing. And Puerto Rican migration increased. The Cuban Refugee Committee grows in Miami because, as I've told you before, Miami is 90 miles from Cuba. So, anyway, that's all I have today. So all about the middle class. After spring break, we're going to talk about the civil rights movement, which should be interesting. I hope you all have a fabulous break, and I will see you when we come back. Have a great morning, afternoon, or evening.